You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right, our favorite Wookiee's right-hand man is here to keep us hydrated. So we've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about, including what we have coming up on the podcast. But before we get to that, I do want to mention that we have some requests to discuss certain topics, including gas taxes and gas prices. And I wanted to wait until I had some guests because I think that discussion will be better than just me. So unfortunately, some unforeseen circumstances took our guests out this week, but they'll be back soon. So we'll wait to have that discussion next time. And thanks for getting excited about us talking about a topic. Appreciate everybody who wrote on Twitter and other places looking forward to us speaking about certain things. So it makes me happy to know that you all actually hear what we want to say, or what we have to say, I should say, from time to time. Also, I want to thank folks for listening to our show recently so much. So many folks have been checking out the podcast. The numbers have been going up on the first day that it releases, usually more than they had been before. So really appreciate that. Talking Headways and Mondays at the Overhead Wire have been getting some great numbers, including some older episodes. So hopefully folks are hopping on that hadn't been on the train before. So thanks for listening. And I hope you guys liked the episodes with Jeremy Levine and David King and Kevin Kryzak. This week we'll have one-on-one discussion between two wonderful folks about Durham, North Carolina, and their public outreach program for transit that we first shared on the Rail Evolution podcast. But we do share those podcasts here on our feed, usually about a month after they release on the Rail Evolution podcast. But we love having those because they're sometimes a breath of fresh air from the usual topics that we talk about. And then Jenny Schutz is coming up too. We recorded that last week, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with folks as well. And lots of great stuff coming out. So I've got a few good ideas also that I'm working on for future shows. So stay tuned for that. And also I want to remind folks that because we cover a lot of these books, as I mentioned last time, we partnered with bookshop.org as an affiliate. This means that if you buy a book through the Overhead Wire on Bookshop, a small amount of that purchase goes to us. So we love when you order from your local bookstores, but if you want to support the authors we have on, as well as help keep us interviewing people, that would be tremendous. So all the books we've ever discussed on the show with the authors are now in the shop. Unfortunately, I think that last week's book with Kevin and David King isn't there because it's not actually in Bookshop, doesn't have access. But go to Elgar for that one for sure and pick that up. Because that was a good book and definitely worth a read. It's a short book also, which is a bonus, I think, for a lot of folks who are strapped for time. So if you get a chance to get that one, for sure. But every other book that we've ever posted is at Bookshop. So check that out. Bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. Bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. And finally, as you know, we have an extra copy of Peter Norton's Autonorama. Folks who listened to the last few episodes were great at commenting about the episodes on social media, so I put the names in a hat, including you, Captain Transit. I know you listened, and I know you commented. And I came out with our winners. So Jason Schaefer, you're the winner of Peter Norton's book, Autonorama. Shoot me an email at theoverheadwire@gmail.com, and we can work out a way for me to send it to you. I'm really looking forward to maybe having a few more of these. I know we've given books out in the past, and it's good to share some of that knowledge with folks. And like I said, it's great to have folks commenting on the show on social sites and stuff like that. But it's also just good to give folks a book that they will appreciate and read. So I appreciate that. Well, this is episode 108. We're in session. Before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. Two fun podcasts, one great channel. And to the folks that subscribe through podcatchers, I know we mention this every week, but we really appreciate it. It's awesome that you guys keep coming back to the show. We really do appreciate it. We see it in the numbers, and we are super psyched to have you. So let's get to the news, shall we? Here are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks since the last episode. So basically what we do is we post articles on the newsletter. You can go to theoverheadwire.com to sign up for a free 2-week trial. And we take articles from multiple places. We go through about 1,500 items a day, and we pull out the 30 to 40 we think are the most interesting in a number of different topic areas. And what happens is we filter those through, we send them out to our readers, and then they click on the ones they're most interested in. And so at the end of the week, I compile which ones I think are the most interesting, and we have the numbers for how many people clicked on them to take a look. And these are the articles that we talk about the most in the show. So that's how we come up with the articles to talk about in the show, is the ones that people actually responded to when we sent them out in the newsletter. So I find a whole bunch of stuff, I send it out, people click on the stuff that they think is the most interesting, and then we kind of talk about it a little bit more on the show, allow me to give a little bit of a deeper dive, because if I'm being honest, I don't get to read all 40 articles every single day. It's a little bit too much, especially while we're going through the other 1,500 and cycling through, trying to figure out what's the most interesting. So these are the items that were the most popular over the last 2 weeks, or part of the most popular. I will say some pieces are popular and I just don't end up talking about them because they didn't fit, or is something that I don't know as much about, or something that I felt like was a longer research time than maybe I had time for. But here we go. Omaha plans for the future of downtown. To attract more talent and grow the region, Omaha has big plans for its downtown, including making room for 30,000 more employees and residents over the next 20 years. The Chamber of Commerce's Urban Core Strategic Plans lay out a vision of new housing, a highway turned into a boulevard, and better transit access. So this was by Henry Cordes and Jessica Wade at the Omaha World Herald, a paper of renown. That had a really long piece on this. I mean, this was a long read, if I do say so, and it was a good one. They had lots of images, they had lots of good information about Omaha's history, the downtown history, the past. It was a really good read, and we often don't hear much about Omaha, but they're really focused on rethinking downtown and even building a streetcar, hopefully with dedicated lanes, and they have eyes on a larger network of transit as well. But I really love the ambition of these mid-sized cities, and though the ambition didn't always come as they would have liked in the past. From the article I read, it says basically that in the 1960s, there were 48,000 people working in downtown Omaha, and projections for many more over the next 20, 30 years. But then over the next 50 years or so, the city lost about 21,000 workers from that 48,000. So, the chamber actually believes that this is because they didn't get young talent, and the talent that they had in the city, or that left the universities, local universities and other places, ended up going to other places like Denver that were doing more exciting things in the 90s and 2000s. And so I'm always interested in this talent and creative class arguments I know a lot of people make for downtown growth. It feels like a very Richard Florida thing to talk about, which I'm not quite the biggest fan of necessarily. But I think some of these cities now have a different advantage in that, as housing gets more expensive around the country, and we'll talk about housing in a couple of articles, but as housing gets a little bit more expensive around the country, places that have less expensive housing actually have this, I think they have an advantage now because of the growth that they might be able to attract because of their housing stock. The only thing that they need to do then is that make sure that they keep up with the changes in the growth of the region by building more housing. They don't want to fall into the trap of a San Francisco or an Austin where you think you have it good and then you decide that you don't want to build anymore. And so the prices outstrip the number of people that can pay for them, and you have a greater demand for space than you have space available. And then, everything goes to crazy real quick. Also, if I'm being political, there's also an electoral vote at stake, as Omaha basically gets its own vote inside of Nebraska's electoral system. So for president, Omaha is that little kind of speck that it goes from Republican to Democrat both years. But it's interesting that if Omaha built up its downtown, if it built up its urban core, how many more residents live there and what types of residents those are, it's an interesting political discussion from an electoral college standpoint, especially with everything so close each cycle recently of the last 20 years or so. So that's interesting as well. So it's interesting to watch what's going to happen with Omaha and see how they're doing, because it's an interesting plan. It's from the pictures at least, it looks really cool what they're trying to do. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of private investment to change a lot of those parcels that they have in these gleaming showcase that is the images from the article. But it's really cool to see them step forward and try to do something really cool with the downtown. And the Chamber of Commerce has taken that forward, which often not I shouldn't say often, but sometimes they're the ones that are kind of holding places back because they kind of like the things the way they are. But these folks seem to want to grow and change things up. So it's interesting to see what's going on. So that was a cool article. Okay. Colorado could soon allow Idaho stops. The Colorado state legislature has voted for a law that would allow Idaho stops in the state. If enacted, the law would allow bike riders to slow down to under 10 miles per hour without coming to a complete stop at intersections. Additionally, at intersections without cars, a red light would become a stop sign, and a stop sign becomes a yield sign. It would soon be sent back to the House and then to the governor's desk for passage. So this is by Hannah Metzger at Colorado Politics. Well, this is exciting. I really hate having to full stop at every red light on Valencia Street, even if there are no cars in the area. It seems like a good way to encourage more biking. And I know that there's plenty of drivers out there who are frustrated when they see a bicyclist not stop all the way. But, one of those things that cyclists could use the help. I mean, if you've ever ridden a bike, you understand that the momentum that comes from slowing down a little bit, or at least to like maybe 2 to 3 miles an hour versus stopping altogether, and how frustrating that is versus when you're in a car, all you do is step on the gas. It's not really that hard, and so it's a different physics question overall. And I think that if you come to a stop and there's nobody around, it seems silly that you make a bicyclist stop at a stop where there's no cars on either edge. If there is a necessity to slow down, there's a necessity to look in all directions to make sure that nobody's coming, but it is a frustrating thing for cyclists, and I hope that this Idaho stop takes off all over the country. Okay. New buildings change neighborhoods for the better. New research from the Urban Displacement Project looked at the impacts of new buildings constructed in existing neighborhoods. They found that the new buildings increased what is known as churn, or more people moving in and out of a neighborhood based on need. But one surprising finding was that when more new buildings were built, people of lower incomes moved into the neighborhood more than stagnant areas. This was by Henry Grabar at Slate. I thought this was an interesting finding. There's room for both more construction as well as tenant protections in this finding. I think that ultimately, we need to protect the tenants that might be pushed out, but also provide more housing in an area to allow more in-migration. I mean, as this research shows, providing more housing actually creates that churn that allows more low-income people to move into a neighborhood. And if you don't have that churn, people, are basically kept out of the neighborhood altogether. So I think this really blows a hole in anti-housing NIMBYism, as well as kind of those lefter takes in San Francisco that new market rate housing is all bad housing. I think that's a frustrating thing about the conversation we're having here in the city. But I think that the research that they're doing at the Urban Displacement Project is showing that there's a lot of things that we're learning over time that change the way we think about displacement, about gentrification, and it's really fascinating to see how that all comes about. I mean, one of the first things I remember them researching was kind of, if you think a neighborhood is suffering from gentrification, it's probably already too late. But the neighborhoods that aren't quite there yet are the ones that actually can be helped. And I don't remember exactly what the name of the research was that it's from, but I think it was Karen Chappell and her groups that were doing that research. And it was really interesting to see how that systematic over time, 40 years, 50 years of time. It's not just like in the last 5 years, 10 years type of thing. It's a process that takes decades to complete, and to come to that end. I should say completion sounds really bad. I didn't mean it that way, but I mean it takes time for a neighborhood to get hit by gentrification, but it doesn't just start when it gets hit. It starts way before that. It's interesting to think about. Okay, why some boomers tell millennials there's no housing crisis. So John Elledge writes that one of the reasons why some older Brits think housing isn't that expensive for younger people is because they're comparing it to other housing options instead of incomes. The lowest end $300,000 home might look good when everything else is $600,000 or more, but if you're only making $50,000 a year, it's still unaffordable. So this is by John Elledge at New Statesman. I hadn't thought about this before. Our good friend John mentioned it. John's been on the show a couple times when he was at Citymetric, so I really always appreciate his writing. But I don't think people realize how expensive housing is for certain incomes, especially median incomes. So if the median income in a region is like 50,000 a year, then you can afford a mortgage of about 1,000 a month or so, given financing and down payment. Depends on how much of a house you can afford, but right now that only gets you about 200,000 for 1,000 a month with the, I think, around the current interest rates, maybe like maybe 205,000. So when the median house is $500,000, that leaves out a lot of people with median income. So it's frustrating. There are a lot of people out there that don't see the rising housing costs and rising education costs as a problem, and instead tell young people that they should just eat less avocado toast or save pennies, like it's going to matter when you're short hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't think a couple of extra muffins is going to make up $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 on your down payment for a house. But it's interesting, the kind of the example that John gives that doesn't quite have to do with housing, but he talks about tea, but I'm going to give a burger example. So, that $10 burger on that menu at that kind of restaurant, that expensive restaurant, and it looks super cheap compared to all the $15, $20, $30 entree menu items, but not against the $5 meal deal at Burger King. So that's not available at the current establishment. So we need to figure out a way that that doesn't look like the best option when there should be other options that are available. Then that $10 burger looks really expensive on the menu, but it could look cheap compared to everything else. Okay. I don't know if that analogy got over the hump, but I tried. All right, so your sense of direction comes from your youth. New research out of the University College in London has found that people who grew up outside of cities and in areas with unorganized street grids are better at directions later on in life. After gathering a database of more than 4.3 million responses, the researchers posit that developing a sense of direction is like developing a language, which is easier earlier in life. The findings have value in thinking about diagnosing dementia in its earliest stages. So this was by Benjamin Mueller and the New York Times. I found that comment about language really interesting. I wish I could, I know Spanish to a certain extent because I know a number of vocabulary words, but my conjugation is really bad. But I learned it later on, kind of in high school and older. And I think if you learn languages earlier, and even I think in high school or even early college, it's probably okay. But once you get past that point, it's much harder to learn languages. And I think the side of your brain that that delegates whether it's hard or not is the same one that goes with directions. Now, in terms of directions, I feel like I've always been pretty good with directions. I think it's why I was doing a lot of cartography early on in my career, and I think it's also why I could always find where I was going when I was running places, when I was running track in high school and college. And I think you get a better sense of direction when you have to solve puzzles or think spatially. Where I grew up, there was lots of trails that went through the woods, and you had to kind of know where you are at any given time to know where you are in the neighborhood, because there were no street signs. It was always it was concrete pathways, but it was always in the woods. So you have to kind of think about where you are, where the next junction is that you can turn, and where that turn might take you. I think that really helped me out. But even a grid is no guarantee of success, because I had a college teammate who got lost on numbered streets in Boulder, Colorado. One time we were out for a run in the summer when I lived there one summer. So a bad sense of direction can hit even harder if the grid on the grid, if it's just a generally bad sense of direction. So I think that's kind of funny too. I always remember that. I won't name names, but it's always funny to remember that instance where I was telling my friend, what street number are you on? He's like, it was a high hundreds number or something like that. And I was like, well, you're not very far away. You're only 4 blocks away. Count the numbers. And because he was calling on a phone. It's funny. It's good history and interesting to think about, how we develop our skills over time, and not just in directions or wayfinding, but just kind of language and everything else that we learn. It's amazing how much we learn over our lifetimes and continue to learn. Hopefully we continue to learn throughout the rest of our lives. Okay. Tire chemicals are killing fish. Researchers following up on a study that showed salmon were impacted by a tire chemical found in runoff have also found other fish, such as trout, are impacted by the same chemical in streams near roads. The chemical, which has been used in tires since the 1950s, acts to keep fish from processing oxygen when they breathe. Just a small amount in an urban stream is enough to suffocate and kill trout. So this was by Bob Weber at the Toronto Star. So we talk about this often, but it's not just the tailpipe emissions when it comes to pollutants from vehicles of all kinds that really matters. It's frustrating that electric cars are given a pass to a certain extent because the battery packs are super heavy. they're likely to cause more tire particles and brake dust. And we've talked about this a number of times on the show. But I think one of the things we need to think about seriously is doing more with smaller vehicles so that we don't get that pollutant, that particulate, that rubber detritus. And if we did lighter vehicles, we'd also have less mining to do for all these rare earth metals that we need, the cobalts and the lithiums, et cetera. And one of the things that I think is frustrating for a lot of folks now is that like the battery alone in say like a Hummer or one of these new Ford trucks that's going to be, or Chevy trucks that's going to be electric in the future, is that they're the same weight as a post-war sedan. I think that's frustrating for a lot of folks to understand that the electric vehicle revolution may be coming, but it also has its own kind of problems as well, and its own inertia, as we've talked about many times on the show. There's something really cool. I saw actually UPS is creating an eQuad bike truck, which is pretty cool and a solution I can definitely get excited about for delivering packages in cities. And it fits in bike lanes, and it carries almost 500 pounds worth of packages for the last mile. For the last mile. And I think that those types of solutions are going to be really good. And and you don't need to have as big a battery for those because, well, for this one specifically, it's going to be a bike truck, and so you only need some power assist, and you can use your legs, which is going to be good. So those types of solutions are out there, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with electric vehicles and whether we can actually clean up these chemicals that are we know now are killing fish in streams that are next to roads. Okay, why Christopher Alexander still matters. So urban design pioneer Christopher Alexander passed away last week at the age of 85. His books, including his best-known work, A Pattern Language, are still must-reads for architecture students and computer coders around the world. He even inspired the inventor of Wikipedia. But even though he has passed, what he has taught us about design is really important, and we must figure out a way to sustain the environment around us. This is by Michael Mahaffey in Planetizen. I think Michael worked with Christopher Alexander for a number of years. I must say I love pattern language. Ever since my 980Z class at the University of Texas in planning school, I've had an affinity for that book. My classmate Jason Reyes actually helped us design our final project by opening the book and kind of just flipping through pages. And we were helping a church kind of take back a city street in Austin and do a redesign. And we had, basically to do our part of the project, we used multiple patterns from the book. And it was really cool to kind of learn how you could actually, design a neighborhood by using some of the patterns in the book and thinking differently about design and city building, et cetera. So I'm really happy that I got to have that experience, and I'm kind of bummed that Christopher Alexander is passed, but I wanted to do something really quick I thought would be fun. I have a pattern language in front of me, and I was just going to open it up to some random page. I don't have a page picked. I was just going to open up to a random page and see what the pattern is, and it seemed like a fun thing to do to kind of honor the book and honor Christopher. So I'm going to open it up in here, and let's see what we find. Let's see here. So, here's one. On page 444, I just opened this. I didn't pick it. It just opened 90, pattern 90, a beer hall. A public drinking house where strangers and friends or drinking companions is a natural part of any large community. But all too often, bars degenerate and become nothing more than anchors for the lonely. Robert Sommer has described this in Design for Drinking, Chapter 8 of his book, Personal Space, Inglewood Cliffs, New Jersey, Prentice Hall, 1969. Interesting. So where people can sing and drink and shout and drink and let go of their sorrows, a beer hall. So that's one of the patterns in a pattern language. I don't remember a beer hall, but it's in there. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to go back in time and see what they were thinking about then. So I also wanted to note that Christopher Alexander had student contributors too that helped write this book and other books as well. It wasn't just him. And, a lot of them don't actually get the same kind of credit for the work that Christopher does. Obviously, he was the head of writing the books and putting them together. And I think he had the best grasp on what was going on. But it was interesting to learn, actually. I was interested to learn, actually, that, there was a great piece in my dad's Berkeley Student Co-op magazine. My dad went to the University of California, Berkeley back in the 60s. And, he was a part of the co-op, and he's still really involved in the co-op now. And the Co-op magazine actually had an article about Sarah Ishikawa, who helped Christopher Alexander write A Pattern Language. Actually, her name is the first one under his. There's actually, looks like there's 5 names here, including Murray Silverstein, Max Jacobson, Ingrid Fixdal King, and Shlomo Angel. Who I think Shlomo is in New York nowadays. I'm not familiar with the other folks, but it was interesting to read that piece in the alumni magazine about Sarah Ishikawa, who helped Christopher Alexander write this book. And, she went through a lot actually in her life, which I think, probably led to some of the really cool innovations in the book. She went to, and some setbacks too. I mean, a lot of setbacks actually. If you look at the article, she went to the Tule Lake internment camp during the war. She was Japanese, and unfortunately, when folks were interned, she was one of them. She was made to sign a loyalty oath to keep tax-exempt status during the McCarthy era, which sounds scary, especially at that time period where you didn't know if people were going to accuse you of something you had nothing to do with. She had to deal with sexism from professors that told her that Berkeley Architecture School was no place for looking for husbands. And she worked in Sweden for a while. She also apparently did performance standards for BART before it was constructed. And apparently those performance standards got her and Christopher Alexander dismissed from the project, which means they must have been pretty good. I want to see those. So if anyone knows where that work is, I'd love to read it. It sounds really fascinating. So there's all kinds of stuff that goes on when you write a famous tome like A Pattern Language, but the people that help on the project do some cool things in the meantime as well. So I just wanted to highlight that because I thought it was pretty cool. Thanks to my dad for giving me the article from his Co-op magazine and for sharing more about Sarah. It would be really cool actually to have her on the show. I'll see what I can do. I'll see if we can reach out to Sarah Ishikawa and talk about her life because it sounds like some really interesting stuff that she did as an architect over time as well. So A Pattern Language has left a big impact on a lot of people, I think. I'm sure Christopher Alexander will be missed by many. His work on Pattern Language, A Timeless Way of Building, and other books, I'm sure will live on, especially with the new urbanists and others out there who have taken it as almost as a Bible to their design aesthetic and feelings about the way design should work. So pretty cool. Hopefully, folks get a chance to get Pattern Language. It's one of those books where it's a huge book, right? It's a huge book. It's let's see how many pages this is. It's let's see. It's over 1,000 pages. It's over 1,100 pages, I should say. So it's a big book, but also it's a pattern book. It's basically you can use it in sections. You can look for sections that work and sections that might help you in design, but you don't need to read the whole book straight through. It's not one of those types of books. So I definitely recommend getting it if you don't have it. If you were in planning school, you likely have it because it was one of those things that's assigned. But if you don't have it, I definitely check it out, pick it up, and I think it'll help in everything. There's a lot of people who, basically the Wikipedia example is prescient, but also computer coders looked towards Alexander's work as well in A Pattern Language early on to for the coding changes that happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So pretty cool stuff from Christopher Alexander. So rest in peace. Okay, I think this is my last one. So in big transit news, actually, this is an article necessarily, but the Van Ness BRT and the Boston Green Line expansion opened, and I think that's really cool. On Van Ness, I haven't gotten to ride, but I've been a few times during the construction to see the red lanes. I think that's really cool. It's awesome. They're really looking forward to that 30 to 40% increase in travel times. And I can't tell you how many times I've been on the 47 to 49 and been annoyed that we're sitting at a light or in car traffic when I had friends to meet. So going up Van Ness, going to the other side of town, the northern side of town. I'm in the center, so done that a couple of times. I actually went to go get my shots for coronavirus. Over at the Walgreens across from City Hall, and one of the things that we did was we took the bus there, and it's funny because after the second shot, I think it was we were walking back to the bus. We got on the bus. I can't remember if it was the 49 or not, but it was, it was on Van Ness. And we got on the bus, and then I rode one block, and I was like, I got to get off because I was feeling like I was going to pass out. And then we got off the next block, and luckily we could get off the next block, and I could lay in front of the Opera House for a few minutes while we were waiting. But that has nothing to do with the bus necessarily, but it's just kind of an interesting story of times on the bus. When you take the bus often, you always have a story for a certain part of the city, and I love that about that. The other thing is, about the Green Line specifically, I was a little bit frustrated by some of the commentary about protecting neighborhoods around the Green Line from displacement and the discussions about that. And not that I don't want that to happen, but Sam Zimbabwe and I did some work for Somerville back in the early 2010s when we were at Reconnecting America, looking at this exact problem of displacements and gentrification along the Green Line and the extension. And some of these articles were written as if nothing had been done since we did some of that research and work. And if that's the case, and I didn't follow it as closely over the last 10 years, but if that's the case, that's really frustrating and seriously a lost opportunity, because one of the amazing things that we found looking at parcel data was that the red line properties going into kind of parallel were really high property values. And, obviously that's going through Cambridge and not Somerville, but, the values compared to the future Green Line stations were kind of skyrocketed, and the Green Line stations were lower. And there was some concern there that would be a possible avenue for gentrification and displacement. And, that was going to be a problem if Somerville's famous, triplexes and housing stock was going to continue to support low and moderate income families. So, this is something that we've been doing and talking about. I mean, the city of Somerville and the Somerville CDC and others have been thinking about. And so if nothing has been done about it, hopefully somebody emails me and tells me that that's not the case. But some of the articles I read from I think it was a local public radio station or somewhere else, local journalists said, talking about none of that stuff actually happened and none of the protections actually happened. So that would be really frustrating if they built this whole line without thinking about that. So hopefully they did. I want to give people more credit than maybe I am now, but it's interesting to read that, especially when we've done some work before on that. And I had a kind of a personal stake in it as well. So hopefully that's being taken care of, and people can stay where they are and not be pushed out by good transit. Okay, well, that's it for today. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month and you'll get some stickers and a handwritten note, as well as a cool stamp. $10 a month and you'll get your bus-only scarf. We have bus-only scarves for folks who become $10 a month Patreons. I don't have them for sale anymore, but we will have some soon. I'm still working on the design for the next bus-only scarf. We'll probably recreate some of the original bus-only scarves as well, because people really like those and they've been popular. So we'll do that. But if you want one, Patreon, $10 a month supporter, and not just get a scarf, but support the podcast each month. We really appreciate that. Also, I want to mention that we did produce the audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice. And if you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com. The book was really fun to produce. And if you're a history of planning fan, it's the very first one listed on the APA's 100 Essential Books of Planning. So that was really cool to do. Okay, so listener questions and comments. So Colin Elwell writes, I've always meant to write emails in response to your show. While I took an academic break during COVID from working on my BS in science, I discovered your podcasts, and I have an interest in civics, and I listen to them every day commuting from Lowell to Boston Med Center. And this is my first semester back at college. You've inspired me to take sociology classes that were not required for my major. I was curious if you could interview someone advocating for rail to New Hampshire via the Lowell line to Manchester. Being from Vermont, I was curious if you would be interested in Southeast Vermont Transit, SEVT, which recently rebranded themselves as Mover, and I feel you would appreciate their punny name. I do. Thanks, Colin. I do appreciate their punny name, and that's awesome. I'm so glad that you took some sociology classes. I know that that's something that I really liked in school. Part of actually urban planning or actually geography as an undergrad, I had to take some sociology classes, and they were some of my favorites because of the stuff that we learned. It's where I got to read A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe, which I've discussed many times on this show, and a number of books that I was introduced to that I wouldn't have been introduced to otherwise, and actually led me to think about urban planning as a profession. So I thought that was pretty cool. So it's pretty cool that you're taking those classes, and I'm super glad that you're listening to the show. And hopefully at some point, I'll look into the rail to New Hampshire via the Lowell line and see if we can't have somebody on and talk about that. I've also had some requests for folks talking, like I said last episode, talking about Canadian transit versus U.S. transit, and I'm looking for folks to talk about that as well. So hopefully we can get a couple of these in, so we can get your likes in and your requests if we can. So I appreciate you listening, Colin. Thank you so much, and also congrats on keeping going with your studies, and hopefully that sociology work pays off. So if you have a question or comment, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com, or like Colin did, he actually messaged me through LinkedIn. So anywhere you can find me, send me a message and I'll read it on the air if it comes in, and we can put it on that week or the week after. I appreciate everybody's notes because they make me so happy. I appreciate it to hear from folks, to hear what they're doing and how you learned about the show, how you listen to the show. If you come from it late or early, it doesn't matter. We love hearing from everybody that listens in. All right, puppies and butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. So I'm trying to think of what we've been doing. Oh, you know what we've been watching? Domino Masters. On Fox. It's really fun. They're just building these domino buildings. It's kind of like Lego Masters, which was on last summer, and I hope that it comes back for a third season, because that's kind of one of my favorite things. Legos is like my childhood love for Legos has no bounds. I even have all my Legos. They're in the basement, but I have them all still. And but that's fun. The Domino Masters has been fun. I've been watching a lot of the tournament, March Madness. Obviously, the basketball's over tonight is the championship game, and I don't think I'm quite sure when that's finished, but hopefully I'll get a chance to catch the end of that one. But yeah, we've been watching the tournament, watching the Domino Masters, and obviously the usual Food Network and HGTV stuff. So yeah, really cool stuff, really fun. Also, hopefully soon we'll be able to get out and see a couple friends and other folks, as I think, I'm more likely to leave the house now and go and sit in an outdoor cafe or even just in a park and grab a beer with folks. So it's good to kind of get out and hopefully, hopefully we can get this pandemic nicked in the bud so we can actually see each other again. There was a piece about third places today in the Atlantic. I thought that was really interesting, and it's kind of something that I feel like I've been missing a little bit. Going to Geo Beers on Thursdays and those types of things, I haven't really been, engaged in that, because just not being able to go to the bar and hang out has been something that I've been wary of. But maybe in the future we'll get there. So let's see what happens. Well, let me know if there's anything that you all are watching, anything funny to see. Let me know at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. You can find me always on Twitter at @TheOverheadWire or at TheOverheadWire.com. Thanks for joining us on Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks, as always, to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast and every podcast. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you, hopefully, next time.
Talking